Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our program night. Uh, I've been hounding Manish for about 4 or 5 years to do a presentation for us. That was before we were doing virtual Zoom meetings. And I finally wore him down and he agreed to do a meeting for us. So Manish, my hat is off to you. I thank you so much for agreeing to present to us tonight. It's definitely my honor to introduce you. Manish is an avid nature photographer who has traveled widely across the exotic destinations and focuses on landscapes that reflect the beauty of nature. His motto is to showcase the unseen beauty of nature through his aerial photography. He also specializes in landscapes, night/astro, and infrared photography. Manish grew up in Nagpur, India, where he completed his graduation and chartered accountancy. He moved to the United States.
I, I have to go.
We okay? Did I lose you or you lose me?
Yeah, I just had to mute somebody.
Oh,
No, I just had to mute somebody.
okay. Manish grew up in Nagpur, India, where he completed his graduation and chartered accountancy. He moved to the United States in 2008 to work as an IT/finance consultant. He discovered his love for photography in 2010 when he first visited Yosemite National Park and experienced the beauty of that majestic park. Manish's work has won many national and international awards, including Grand Prize in the USA National Parks Contest, Share the Experience, ND Awards, Black and White Spider Awards, London School of Photography, etc. I think he might have also won some big awards in panoramic photography as well, if I remember correctly. His work has been published in several national and international media, including the National Geographic books, Vanity Fair, Parade, Digital Photo, Digital Camera World, Better Photography Magazine, and the Department of Interior, and many, many more. He has judged national and international photo contests, including the 2015 Sky Pixel Photo Contest, which is for aerial photography, Siena International Photo Awards in 2016, Urban 2016 Photo Awards. His work has been exhibited in major exhibitions, including the Smithsonian Museum, Big Pictures, Nature's Best, and so on. So can we please have a very warm gateway welcome from Mr. Manish Mamtani.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you, Paul, for the wonderful introduction and giving me an opportunity.
Very welcome, Manish. Very well deserved.
Yeah, and giving me an opportunity to showcase my work with you all. Let me start by sharing my screen. Please let me know when you can see my screen.
We can see it.
Okay, perfect. So let's start with the presentation.
Okay, while you're setting that up, if you have questions, you can put them in chat, and I'll be monitoring the chat, and we'll bring the questions to Manish as we can.
Great. You guys can see my screen right now, my presentation?
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. So about me, Paul did a great job already introducing me. I'll just try to add a little bit to it, that why do I do night photography? So my love for the night sky is the reason I ventured into astrophotography. Basically, hiking in the night sky not only fulfills my appetite for adventure, but also makes me appreciate my existence amongst billions of galaxies, where our planet itself is not more than a tiny dot. So I grew up in India. Growing up, I used to see constellations, try to find constellations, and I didn't see Milky Way till I actually came down to the United States. I went to a lot of parks. I saw that how the night sky is preserved in US national parks. And that kind of gave me an inspiration to visit these parks more and more often, to do the photography, to visit during the nighttime. It used to be so peaceful. After doing my daily work, I would try to find out weekends where I could travel down to the national parks and take pictures and be there during the nighttime. So basically that kind of gave me that inspiration to start doing photography. This quote from Vincent van Gogh basically describes my love for night sky in a better way. For my part, I know nothing with any certainty, but the sight of the stars make me dream. This picture I took in Utah. This is basically a panoramic image of the whole Milky Way arch rising above the salt flats. So there is a lot of planning that goes in any kind of photography, but when we talk about night sky photography, Milky Way photography, it's even crucial to know the basics of night sky photography. For example, if you want to shoot the Milky Way, you need to know what is the best time to shoot it, the Milky Way. In Northern Hemisphere, if you see the galactic center, what we call as the galactic core of the Milky Way, it's visible from February. However, in February, it's visible for a very short duration. So you have to get up very early in the morning and try to shoot that. For me, the best time for taking pictures of Milky Way is from March to September. So October as well, you can see it, but again, it's for a very short duration. And from November and Jan is like the time I don't take Milky Way photos because the Milky Way core is not visible anymore during that time. I prefer to shoot personally when there is no moon in the sky. So specifically, you can use various apps to do the planning. You can find out the moon rise and moon set time as well. And depending on that, you can plan the overall Milky Way shoot. The reason is that if you have a bright moon or moon, it kind of eats away a lot of stars. So the details you see in the Milky Way, they are not very much visible when there's a moon in place. I prefer the new moon week when kind of I get a lot of time during that time to shoot because the moon is smaller in size, not much of light, and kind of gives a lot of time, continuous time for me to plan my trips and shoot the Milky Way photography. So if I have to plan, go out to Utah or any other national parks, I prefer this week specifically. If you see in this figure diagram, which I took from Photopills, this kind of tells you when do these different twilights occur. So when the sun is about 12 degrees below the horizon, the astronomical twilight starts. And when it is 18 degrees below the horizon, you have the pure night. So there is no light from the horizon, at the horizon from the sun. I prefer to shoot starting from astronomical twilight because I take some long exposures and I get details in my foreground objects as well during that particular time. A lot of people prefer to shoot after astronomical twilight. A lot of people take some photos in the civil twilight and then wait it out or come back later to take the Milky Way photos. For me, the philosophy has been that I take the Milky Way photos at the same time. So even if I'm taking a longer exposure for the foreground, I'm taking it at the same time as I'm taking the stars photo. So this image is the basic, the image that I took in Eastham. This is Salt Pond, Eastham. And I took this image in May. I believe it's been 3 years now that I took this image. I'll show with the app called Photopills how you can plan and how the Milky Way is visible at this place during different months. So if I look into the Photopills app, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this app, but this app provides you details of a lot of things like Milky Way. It can provide you details of sun, moon, and other aspects as well that you can plan for your different kinds of photography. In this case, for example, the first screen print is from March. The second one is, the middle one is from April, and the third one is from May. So if you look into my previous picture that I was sharing, the hut over here, this particular hut is where I wanted the Milky Way above it. So I had to plan it accordingly. And let's see. So in this case, this is the hut that we are looking at. And if I am planning for that shot in March, this is where my Milky Way is rising, and this is where my Milky Way is setting. So in March, the Milky Way core is visible from 1:55 a.m. until 4:22 a.m. But the Milky Way rises in southeast and kind of sets in southeast as well in this case. If I look into April, I have more visibility of Milky Way. And if I look into May, I have even more visibility of Milky Way, and the time increases when the Milky Way is rising and Milky Way is setting. So more or less in the earlier months, you have the Milky Way rising from the southeast and setting in the southeast or towards the south. This kind of helps me in planning my images as well, because I wanted the Milky Way right here to be rising from here, because I know if the Milky Way is here, there is a lot of light pollution from the cities on the southern side from eastern. So the Milky Way core is basically not visible if I'm shooting it from here. So one of the factors for planning it in May month was this, that I wanted the grass to be a little greener so that there is some color in my photo. And that is the reason I planned it in May, and it went out there and took that picture of the Milky Way rising over the salt pond. So if I look into other months, like I talked about March, April, and May, now it is more and more June and July. So during June and July, the core is visible for almost all the night, for the whole night. So these are the months that you'll see a lot of photographers taking Milky Way photos all across, because you have the whole night to take those photos. The Milky Way core is visible all night. If I look into this app, it kind of tells me that from 10:24 p.m. to 2:54 a.m., this is on 9th of June, when there is no moon in the sky. If I look into July, again, it's for 10:23 to 3:08. So it gives a lot of time, almost the whole night, for the Milky Way core to be visible. But I didn't plan it, this shot here, during these months, because the core is more or less towards the light pollution in this case. So even though I have more visibility, I would pick up different locations to plan. So all these factors go into place when you're planning a Milky Way shot. You have to answer if there is a specific object that you want Milky Way to be visible. You have to basically see if there is a light pollution during that time. What time of the year does the Milky Way actually is above that object or near that object that you want to photograph it with? So you have to answer all these questions before planning a Milky Way shot, because even if you have seen a photo of Milky Way over a place, it might not be possible all the months. So I pay attention to all these places. I visit all these places. I carry my phone with me, so I am looking in the live view there in the night, AR, VR, and basically trying to see where the Milky Way will be during that time when I'm planning to shoot the photo. And this kind of gives me idea. And that is the reason I travel a lot, even when the Milky Way is not visible, to new locations, to find new locations to capture the Milky Way shots. And now from August onwards, the core visibility begins to decrease, and the best viewing time towards is after the dusk, until it becomes totally invisible again in the winter, November. So November is, from November onwards, November, December, Jan, is the time I usually do not shoot the Milky Way photos, because the core is not visible. The other end of the Milky Way is visible, but more and more stars that are part of the core are not visible. So now you see the Milky Way over here, when it is rising, it is already above the horizon. So this also kind of tells you that what kind of photos are you imagining? Do you want a horizontal picture? Do you want a vertical picture? So if you're planning for a vertical image of the Milky Way, then your best bet is to start shooting in August, September, and October, because you see the Milky Way is already up over here. And even though the visibility is for almost 2 hours, but you get the vertical part of the Milky Way and before it is actually setting up. So as the months progress, you see less and less time, you get less and less time with the Milky Way. If I'm taking vertical images, I prefer August and September, sometimes October as well, if I'm planning specific shot with the fall colors. I've not seen a lot of pictures of Milky Way with the fall colors, but I try to see, because there is a very short time during that period, during that month, that you actually see the Milky Way. So you have to plan it accordingly and decide what you want to do with your Milky Way photography. Any questions so far on this?
No questions so far. We're good.
All right. So the other part that I shoot from the Milky Way side is the Milky Way arch. Milky Way arch is nothing but panorama of different images, because Milky Way is rising from kind of the southeast, and the other end is towards more towards north. In that case, you are almost trying to cover anywhere from 130 to 180 degrees that you cannot take more or less from one single image. So this image specifically was taken in Arches National Park, and this is a stitched image from 10 vertical images. So I used the lighting from the setting moon. So these rocks and mountains, the light you see is the orange glow. The red glow on this is from the setting moon. The moon was setting, and I used that particular light because it was not that bright as it was setting. I could still see the stars, and I could also see the details in the foreground. So you can plan these things as well. At what time do you want to take a specific photo? Do you want some light? Do you want to light paint, or do you want to use the natural light from that particular source? This image is another panoramic image of the Milky Way. This was taken at Mesa Arch in Canyonsland National Park. So this image is light painted. These days, it's not allowed to do the light painting in the national parks, but this image was about 6-7 years back. And when I reached this location, I met Royce Bear. He had set up the lighting, and he was having his workshop during that time at this space. So I had to take pictures. I couldn't wait for them to finish. So I used the already set up, the whole setup that they had used, because I wanted to take this Milky Way arch image over the Mesa Arch. So the whole idea was Mesa Arch is kind of echoing the Milky Way arch, and the other way around as well. Again, I took around 7 vertical images in this case. And the reason you see all the details in this image is because I kind of use, for one single vertical image, I kind of use 6 to 7 images. So what I do is I shoot at a very high ISO. And to avoid noise, even if you go see the higher resolution of my images, you won't see much of the noise. The reason is I use softwares like Starry Landscape Stacker to stack these images on top of each other. That reduces the noise. So earlier days, these softwares were not there. That wouldn't give you that flexibility to have the cleaner looking night sky images. But with these softwares, you can take, what I do is my preferred setting for 24mm f1.4 lens is somewhere around f1.8 to 2.0 with around 8 seconds, and I shoot it up to 10,000 ISO. Even though there is noise, but when I stack those images, I don't see any noise, any visible noise in that case. And that is the reason you see much, much cleaner Milky Way images and more and more details in the stars. So this is
The question we had, Manish, is how long does it take you to shoot a panorama like that?
If you calculate it, because first of all, I had to do the whole planning before I reach there. So there is a lot of time that goes in the planning. I have to be there at the right time to take the photos. But if I do not have any other constraint, like if there is any light that is going away, like the moon setting or anything, if I'm taking 8-second photos, so about 8 photos, 1 minute for one frame, and then I have around 8 frames in those cases. So around 8 to 10 minutes I take to take one picture in that case if I'm taking a panorama image. By the time the Milky Way is not rising that high or not changing, But if I have factors like there's a moonlight and the moon is setting and I want to use that light, then I would just go in with single shots and then stack them together as well. Then my settings will be a little different because I have to deal with the noise as well in that case. So this example is from Stellarium, where what I'm trying to show you is that if you're in April, this is from 2006, at 3 a.m., the arch from south to north is low in the horizon. So it is easy to capture a panoramic image that I was showing before. At the same time in May, you see it going above because it's already towards the south and more going towards the north as well. If I look at the same place, same time in June, it's way above in the sky. But in June, I can go a little earlier and get the similar image that I was getting in April. The idea here is that the possibility of taking these panoramic images is mostly from March to June, or maybe in July as well. But as you go in August, September, the Milky Way is so high up in the sky, it really gets difficult to take those Milky Way arch images as such, because you need an ultra wide angle fisheye lens to capture that, and they are not that fast. So I prefer, if I have to plan and shoot a Milky Way arch image, panoramic image, then I prefer the earlier ones as well. The next factor is to go away from the light pollution. More and more city lights, they just eat away the stars and you basically cannot see a lot of night sky. Now this image is from NASA 2016, but if you see most of the western side, southwest is the place I prefer to go out and shoot the Milky Way. If not, then I prefer New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine to take the photos. If I'm taking photos in Cape Cod, then I prefer months till May to take those photos, because from June onwards, the cold is more towards in the light polluted area. So keep that in mind when you're planning, because this is an example of where I am shooting towards the light pollution, even though I'm away from the city, but the city is in the southern side, and I see so much of light that is unnecessary going in the sky, pointed towards the sky, and kind of eating away whole of the night sky. So the beauty of the night sky is almost gone. But if you go to places like Acadia National Park, you can still see the stars, you can still see the details of it. If you are using your techniques, you can get the colors out of the Milky Way and the nebulas. It's kind of like the way our ancestors probably saw the night sky, when there were no cities, no light pollution, no unnecessary light up in the night, pointed towards the sky for no reason. So there are a lot of people who are working towards this as well, making people aware that, like for example, in the city of Moab, there is work going on where they are encouraging people to point the light towards the ground and have a cover on top of it so that there is no light pollution, that is unnecessary light going in the sky. This picture was taken in May at Boulder Beach in Acadia National Park. Fortunately, this won an award for me as well in the National Parks contest, and it was on the National Parks card for whole year. So that was an honor for me that this image got selected there. So not all the light pollution is bad. If I basically look into this image, I see some of the light pollution. If I am looking into this particular mountain here, then I see this yellow light on top of it. There is a motel there, and this light pollution is basically coming in from that particular part. But I can still utilize that light pollution in my image and bring out the colors, because it's not that bright that it will eat away all the stars. I can still see the Milky Way. I still see the moon setting, and it is lighting up the mountains on the left. So it's still, you can still get colorful images with some of the light pollution in the area. Not all light pollution would be bad, but if you have a pure night, maybe bottle in that case of a sense that away from the cities, and in a pure night where you see all the stars at the horizon as well. So for about Milky Ways, the camera gear I use, I prefer a steady tripod. I use a Gitzo tripod and an RRS head, ball head, basically, and I use a wide angle fast lens. So some of the lenses are very expensive, so you don't have to spend so much of money. There are lenses from Rokinon, which I like 14mm f1 2.8, 24mm f1.4 is one of my favorite lenses. I also use Sigma 14mm f1.8, and recently I have also invested in Sigma 14 to 24mm f2.8, which is kind of like Nikon 14 to 24mm f2.8 lens. These days, with various technologies and various apps, you can still work with the noise, but I prefer a camera with a good low light performance. For example, I use a Astro modified Canon 60, and I use a Sony A7 R3. Recently, I have invested in Canon EOS RA, which is a mirrorless Astro modified camera directly from the Canon. And I plan to use my modified 6D more and more for infrared photography in the future as well. So I usually take my Astro camera as well as my Sony camera. One of the camera I can use for time lapse, the other cameras I can use for taking individual compositions that I deem fit during that time. I use an intervalometer or a remote shutter. Sometimes I use star tracking through Ioptron, but most of the cases these days, because I plan to take a lot more compositions in that particular place and be creative, I kind of spend more time, first few 20-30 minutes, just getting familiar with the place, so that my eyes can also see the stars clearly, and I get away from using harsh lights in the night. There are other photographers shooting these days, and it's inconvenient for them as well. So I spend some time over there. My eyes get used to it. Then I get an idea of the whole place and how I want to compose my shots. These days, I'm trying to find more and more places where not a lot of Milky Way photos are there. And kind of COVID helped me in a way, because I couldn't travel anywhere. So I explored a lot of places in New England, a lot of places where I haven't seen a lot of Milky Way photos or night photos, and traveled down to those places and took a lot of photos. Especially during the COVID times, we could see Comet Neowise as well. So I used that opportunity to capture a lot of those photos as well with different compositions. So my preferred camera settings, I basically prefer to shoot in RAW. I don't shoot in JPEG. RAW gives me more flexibility to play around and to process my images, as all the information is stored in there. Night, I shoot in the manual mode, because your camera will probably go crazy trying to focus in the night. So what I do is I prefer to focus I find a bright star in the live view, and I prefer to focus on that, so that my stars are in focus, more or less. And I set up my aperture to the lowest number possible. Not exactly the lowest number, because if I'm using Rokinon f1.4, my preferred setting will be f1.8 to 2, because you see a lot of comma and other things with the stars if you're shooting so wide open. Not all the lens can take that. So I step down a little in that case and try to shoot what the lens can offer me the best. And my ISO varies between 6400 to 10,000, depending on the camera's low light performance. And as I mentioned, I stack the images to reduce the noise, so it's not a factor anymore. I shoot with auto white balance most of the times. If I'm shooting with the Astro modified camera, I shoot with the custom white balance. And these days, there are apps that they can actually tell you what shutter speed that you can use with your camera and with your lens. There used to be rule of 500, rule of 400, but these days I prefer to shoot NP with the NPF rule. NPF rule also takes into consideration your camera's megapixels and the lens you're using, and kind of tells you what is the best shutter speed that will not give you trails. So when I'm shooting the Milky Way, I don't want any trails in my photos. And that is the reason I basically use these apps this way. This one is Photopills, where I can use the spot stars. And if I'm shooting with Canon EOS 60 at 24 mm f2, it tells me that 10.39 seconds. So I'll take it till 10 seconds, which is best for me. Again, if I'm shooting with Sony a7R III with the same settings, it tells me 8.18 seconds is the best setting for you. Anyways, before this, even I used to only shoot at 8 seconds because based on the experience, you get to know what is the best setting for your particular lens when you're shooting at a prime focal length. So I also do focus stacking. Sometimes there are objects in the foreground which are very close and you want them in your image as a part of your composition. So if you have some tree lines, some leading lines, or in this case, I had this tree with no leaves on it, which I wanted to include in this image because it was looking a little eerie to me. But I couldn't get both the tree and the stars in focus in the one go. So in this case, what I did is in the first image, I manually focused on the stars. So in this image, you can see that I have focused on the stars, but the foreground is a little blurred. In the second image, I actually focus on the foreground, on the tree, and I see that my stars are out of focus and blurred. Most of the times, if your object is not that close, it works out shooting at infinity or focusing at one of the stars, but not in all the cases. So I am aware of those, that what I'm getting in focus. I always check when I'm taking a photo that if my image is perfectly in focus, because I've had bad experiences, and I've learned with experience that I'm doing a trip, I'm going away and coming back with out of focus stars. I don't want that anymore, because the whole trip goes away like that. So that has taught me to always check when I'm taking a photo that what I want in the image is sharp, is in focus, and exactly the way I want to see it. So what I did in this case is I put together the first image and the second image, and I converted into black and white. In this case, everything is as sharp. Luckily for me, there was a car going by with its headlight. It kind of light painted the balanced rock in Arches National Park for me as well. So I converted into black and white because I like this treatment for this photo. Kind of spooky looking, scary location for me that I wanted to show through this image. So I do a lot of blending as well. Because these days, because I'm shooting all the images at the same time, a lot of people, they take Milky Way images and they have a archive of Milky Way images. All they do is go out and shoot the foregrounds and then take the Milky Way and put it on the foreground. That is not my style. I love the whole experience of the things. I enjoy being out there in the nature, to hear the sounds of the nature, and the whole experience is important for me. For me, it's like a stress buster, and that is the reason I go out there. I take my time. I take the photos the way I want to, and I usually take. In this case, I have taken around 8 photos of the sky, which is of 8 seconds each. But at the same time, like if I'm taking 8-second photos, the interval between them is like 1 second each. And then I'm putting that together in the software, which gives me perfect sky and the reflection. But I want details, excuse me. I want details in the fog that I'm seeing over there, which is giving kind of the whole new dimension to the picture, because you see the distance from the front trees to the mountains in the back and to the mid layer because of this fog that is creating, because of the atmosphere that is there. So I want to enhance that fog. And that is the reason I took longer exposure specifically for the fog part in that particular image. And I blended these images together in Photoshop. As all these images are taken at the same time, I don't have to work a lot. It's just some part of the image which is more brighter, because if I was just shooting for the fog, I would see trails in my sky, which I don't want. And what my eyes see, because your eyes get used to seeing the Milky Way. And this image was taken at Coffin Pond in Sugar Hill, New Hampshire. It's so dark out there, you can actually see the whole Milky Way getting reflected in the sky, in the pond. If it is a clear night and there is no wind, it's really beautiful out there. All you can hear is some angry frogs, nothing more in that case. This is the image I took in Yellowstone National Park. And this is in late September. So in late September, my composition will be like this. I'll take more and more vertical shots because the Milky Way is vertical. So I compose it in a certain way that this kind of, the broad walk, the pathway kind of leads you towards the Milky Way. And from there, it kind of takes you to the top of the frame through this Milky Way. So for me to capture this, I had to take a longer exposure of the foreground and a shorter exposure of the sky. The same approach that I explained in my previous photo is applied here. And I put those two images together and not exactly like I shoot it very bright. I try to keep it a little dim so that you actually see a transition and you can make out that it is still dark. It's still the night sky over there, but the clarity gives you more details of the foreground and gives you what you're looking at right now, tells you what you're looking at.
Manish, a couple of questions. First of all, do you ever use built-in camera noise reduction for your long exposures and high ISO?
I do not. I never use a built-in, I don't know the algorithm. So I take the pictures as is. I have the long exposure noise reduction kind of off. And as I'm taking multiple images, and as I mentioned, I use the Starry landscape stacker to stack images to reduce the noise. That's my only way to reduce the noise. And what was the second question?
Hey, Frank, what was the second question?
Is the landscape stacker program that you talked about, is that a special program for stacking stars?
Yes, that is a program that is made for Mac, but there are other programs which can be used, even Photoshop can be used in a way to stack these images together. There is more work on the Photoshop side, but Starry Landscape Stacker asked me basically what are the images I want to stack together. For example, I have a set of 8 images. I tell it, this is my first image, this is my last image. It runs an algorithm and it kind of moves all the images in a way to the center image. For example, I have 8 images. It will either select image 4 or 5 and move all the different images into that, the middle image, and use its algorithm to reduce the noise from your stars. So they look much and much cleaner.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So this image I took in at Crawford Notch in New Hampshire, Crawford Depot. It was a challenging image for me because there is a vending machine that was turned on. It was on the backside, so it was lighting up the whole front foreground for me in that case. So I had to be careful of not taking a longer exposure, because if I had to take longer exposure, even my foreground will be blown out in that case. So I kind of took these Milky Way images and the foreground in a way that they are not blown out, and they provide more and more details. In that case, you see on the mountain on the back, you don't see a lot of details because I didn't take a long exposure for that particular one. There is a roll uphill when you're coming from the other side, and there was a big trailer coming with its full lights on, and I used those lights because it was showing as if the lights, as if the train is coming from the tracks, and it's the light from the train. So I use one of the images that I was doing for stacking purposes to showcase as if there is a train that is coming, and it's going to come to this station right now. But this is nothing but the light from a truck trailer, maybe a bigger one. So this image is one of my favorite images. I took this image in late September as well. As you can see, the fall colors. This was taken in Aspen, Colorado. You have maroon bells, these mountains over there. It's a national forest. And you can see the core of the Milky Way is behind the mountains. But the water was so still that it was, and with the fall colors at the peak, I just couldn't resist and take that horizontal shot in addition to the vertical shot I took. But I like the horizontal one more, so I kept it in that case. I have been to this place 2 or 3 times before, but I never saw still water. It was always windy. It's a high mountain area, and the weather can change very quickly there. And the third time was a charm, and I basically was able to capture this image. Just after a few minutes of this image, it kind of became windy again. So it's all, in addition to whatever planning you do, whatever trips you do, it's a mother nature, it's the weather system, the weatherman that has to cooperate with you when you're planning these shots. If not, then you have to come back again if you had that shot in mind. I used to travel a lot initially. I used to be a consultant, so I used to work Monday to Thursdays and basically spend my weekend at one of these places to take the pictures. So during that time, one of those times, I took this picture, and as I could travel, that was my third trip just to capture this photo in the night, but all worthwhile. So this is one of the images where I actually used light painting. This place is Goblin Valley State Park, and it's a pretty dark place. You don't have any city for miles in any direction, so there is no light pollution whatsoever. As you can see, there are stars near the horizon as well. I used a LED panel on the left side to light up these hurus, and I used another LED panel behind these to light up the mountains or the hurus behind, so that I can basically get the depth in this picture, the 3 dimension. I was using a little more power for the front part than I was using for the back part, as you usually see. And as I was using the light from an angle from the direction, it kind of created some shadows as well, which adds to the 3-dimensional. So that was my purpose with this light painting, so that my image doesn't look flat and as if there is a light or there is a moon or sun that is lighting up these structures from the left side. That was my more purpose for this. Again, it's a beautiful place. You can plan your photos accordingly. You can plan using the light painting tools you have, that you have at your disposal at that point, and use them to the best to get pictures like this. So Luckily, I had 2 light panels there. If I didn't have, I would have tried something else with the light settings I had. Maybe I would have to take more pictures and stand on the left side and take a picture from remote while light painting it from the left side, then light painting from the back side, and use the remote to use those pictures. So it's all what you have at that moment and how you can utilize what you can think of, how creative you can be when you're taking the night photos. Because night photos, especially, first thing is like, oh my God, I cannot see anything. How am I going to take a picture? And then once you are familiar with the place, you spend some time, you get to see the place with your eyes. They get used to that darkness. And then you can utilize to make sure that you're composing the image you want. The other way is that to visit the place beforehand, visit that place and try to figure out with the apps what kind of composition you want at that particular place. This is in Sugar Hill, New Hampshire, taken in June with the lupin season. There's a lupin festival that goes on during that time. And I use the light painting to light up my foreground lupins, which were kind of echoing the shape of the Milky Way above, because I had to wait so that the Milky Way is just above the chapel in that case. And I use a LED panel to kind of light paint the foreground. I again use 8 images for stacking these because I didn't want any noise in my stars in the Milky Way in the sky. There's a light over there near the chapel that was lighting the chapel as well as the middle ground. So that kind of added an additional layer for me when I was trying to take that picture. And after that, there are these shadows from the trees, and I'm light painting it from front. So the whole idea for me was that image should not look flat, and basically the person seeing it should actually feel it, that they are standing right there when seeing the photos. So you can be creative. You can try different ways when doing the night photography. I also use fisheye lens. My fisheye lens captures about 180 degrees, and the image I get is complete circle. So in this case, I kind of took 4 images, 90 degrees apart, and then I put all the 4 images together to create a 360 panorama. The 360 panorama is it's not suitable for social media. You can actually use it in different ways, but one of the ways I use it is I create this little planet panorama using a software called PTGUI, and that kind of puts my 4 images together and creates this little planet format where the lighthouse here in Cape Cod, it's kind of looking like lighting the whole Milky Way. And you can see how much of light pollution is on the opposite side in that case. Kind of gives you an idea, but adds to the overall part of the image. It looks like this whole lighthouse is like a planet in itself in the galaxy. So I try to be creative. I try to use different ways to capture these images. One of the topics I wanted to cover and just talk about is the star trail photography. These days, I do not do a lot of star trail photography. I mostly do Milky Way photography. But when you're capturing the star trail, when I was capturing the star trail photography, I used to make sure that I have Polaris in my frame. So on the northern side, because with the Earth's rotation, as you capture more and more frames or a longer exposure, you can see the star trails around Polaris, the circular star trail. I don't use longer exposures. I use 30-second exposures, like I'm taking a time lapse. And then I would put them together in a software called Star Stacks. What it would do is it will take the first image and the last image, and it will put them together and create the whole rotation in the stars as the trail. In this case, nothing else is moving. Everything is constant and stable. So nothing else is moving, only the movement is in the light. So it adds up the lights and gives me the whole trail. In this case, I've used around 120 images for 30 seconds each with an interval of about 1 second. So maybe 33 minutes or 34 minutes, kind of, that gives me this kind of star trail. This one is about 20 to 25 minutes at the Chocorua Lake in New Hampshire. And I had planned to take a longer star trail, but the cloud started to move in my frame, and it became cloudy just afterwards. So I kind of liked it that there are clouds on the left moving towards it, and as well as the star trails. Not a longer star trail that I expected, but still I like the overall effect. I wanted to have the reflection as well in this case, but it was windy. So unfortunately, I had to go back again and try this at the time. I have one other image from Jordan Pond, which has the reflection in the Jordan Pond in Acadian National Park. But again, I want to take this shot again, so hopefully I get a chance to do that. This is what you can get if you are patient enough, and you can take the star trail standing at one place for about 3 hours. This is a star trail for 3 hours in the night. There's a light pollution, which looks like the sun is coming out, but this is all light pollution. And this chapel is in Texas. I moved to Boston area in 2014. Before that, for 6 years, I lived in Plano, Texas. So I used to travel from there. If I was not traveling, I used to find local places at a distance of 3 hours, 4 hours, where I could see the stars and take some pictures. So this is one of the shots, probably taken about 8 years ago. 3 hours star trail. In that case, if I have 3 hours, I'll try to create 4 or 5 pictures these days with different compositions instead of just creating one. Having more than one camera also helps you. You can set up one camera for star trails and use another camera for taking the images you want to take for Milky Way and others. So any questions so far?
No, I think we're pretty good. We're pretty caught up.
Okay, so before starting the moon photography, maybe I can try to see. Maybe I'll do it later. I'll share a video of time-lapse photos I've taken for the moonrise that I can share with you guys later. Let me go ahead with moon photography first.
Okay, that'd be good.
I have a question for Manish.
Sure.
Manish, do you use a lens warmer of any sort to avoid condensation?
Not many times. Only a few times I've used it. I usually keep looking at it if there is any condensation, but most of the cases I haven't used it. I have to start using it once I got that kind of fog, but I like the effect in the picture I got. It was not that much, so I kept it in that case. But you can definitely use it, especially in New England. If you're shooting in the summertime, it's really helpful.
I have a question, if I can ask it. I don't know, I came in late, so this may have been answered, but I'm trying to understand the logic of shooting 8 images for 8 seconds. I assume that's wide open. Why 8 seconds? Why not 16? Where's those numbers coming from? And I've heard different, you could do why 8 and why 8 seconds? And is there a formula for this, or what's the thinking?
So maybe you can see my screen right now, the slide I'm sharing right now. So there are different rules to calculate basically the exposure time you need so that you don't see the star rotation. That is the main purpose.
Yeah, that I understand.
That is the main purpose for me to take the pictures. So if I am applying an NPF rule, for example, I give the app my camera settings, Canon's EOS 60. I tell it I'm using a 24mm lens, f2.0. Then based on the NPF rule, the app tells me what is the time that you have to use in that particular case so that you don't see the trails. For me, if I'm using Sony A7R III, the app tells me for that setting, it is 8.18 seconds.
Oh,
As
okay,
I'm
now
using 24mm f1.4,
Okay.
for me, that perfect setting is 1.8.
Yeah,
Even if I'm using
okay,
another camera, but for me, I can change my ISO settings. I can reduce the noise. So I don't want any of the star trails for me. And that is the reason I have used 8 seconds in my case, because most of the cases I've used 24mm.
okay. Okay. So yes, no, once you figure out what the right exposure is, so you don't get star trails from this app or the rule.
Yeah.
Then what you're saying is not just do one of those. You're saying take 8 to 10 of those, and that's the way you cancel out noise.
Yeah, you can. I mean, everyone have their own way of doing things. A lot of people wouldn't do 8 pictures. They'll take 1 picture with a lower ISO and try to see if they can adjust some other things, like they have a much faster lens in that case. But for me, I like to print my images as well. I submit my images in the contest. They are published as well in magazines. For me, noise is a big thing. So that is the reason I take these images, 8 to 10, sometimes 6 if I don't have much of the time, and use this app to reduce the noise so that I get cleaner looking images.
Yeah, I got it. Okay.
Yeah.
That's where I was missing.
Okay, thank you. Now we can move on to the moon.
Yeah. So I started doing moon photography almost 2-3 years back. I mean, you can say the super moon photography. There are a lot of people who are taking such kind of pictures. I used to be amazed at looking at these pictures, and I used to wonder how these can be real. How can the moon look so big and bigger than the structure that we are looking at? So I tried to find out the reasons. I tried to study it, and then I started myself because I love the concept and how you can take these moon photos. So there is a lot of planning goes on in the moon photography as well, as I mentioned, for the Milky Way photography. First of all, I prefer to shoot during the full moon, but there are various times you can shoot the bigger moon with different phases. So I use apps. You can use internet and basically search for the moon calendar. In this case, it tells me if I'm looking into it is for Jan, 28 Jan is they are 2 days after tomorrow is a full moon. And then we have 27 Feb as a full moon. If I get these, I kind of have some imagination in my mind how I want to use the full moon, where I want to take the picture, and plan accordingly. So first step for me is to find out exactly using these apps, when is the full moon. Even sometimes the full moon is cloudy, so I can take a picture 1 day after or 1 day before, depending on when the full moon is rising. So there are various apps you can use. You can use Photopills, you can use TPE, you can use Planet. I personally like Photopills a lot. I use that. I've used it at different occasions to take the Milky Way photos. So if you have a location in mind, for example, in this case, I want to take a big moon rising behind the Nubble Lighthouse. And in that case, I have to see, luckily I have a big place, I have a huge road over here where you can basically stand in the coastal region, a big beach as well, where you can stand and take a picture. But I want to figure out in November, because from November onwards, you have the festive Christmas lights on the Nubble Lighthouse. So I want to take a full moon picture with those lights on. So in this case, in November, if I have to take a picture, this is the black marker is the Nubble Lighthouse. And it tells me by providing certain factors, certain criteria to the app, it basically tells me where do I have to stand. The red spot is that to see the moon rising exactly behind the Nubble Lighthouse. So I have to look into various of the factors. It gets more and more technical as you try to find out more and more details out of it. It tells you what is the distance? In this case, it's 3 kilometers, which is about 2 miles, a little shy of 2 miles, is the distance from me to the lighthouse. So I have to figure out what do I have to use. So I'm basically giving the app that, okay, I'm using a 600 mm lens with a 2x teleconverter, and it tells me what will be the distance I have to focus at least to get even the moon and the lighthouse to be very sharp. That is called hyperfocal distance, which is in this case is a little beyond, but still the near range is 2.13 kilometers. So at least I can get this lighthouse in focus. Moon will be a little blurred, but that wouldn't affect my picture as such. So if I have to take the same picture and I decided to go in September, then I'm standing at the same spot. The moonrise is towards the right. It's more towards the east than the northeast. So that wouldn't work out for me. So if you have a picture in mind, you can use this app to find out when exactly the moon is going to rise from behind that particular object or building, and where do you have to stand. If I have to consider everything, for example, I don't want the moon exactly near the building, but I want it above the lighthouse tower where the light is, then I have to consider the height of the lighthouse tower as well. How much meters above it is above the ground, as well as how much meters above it is above the sea level, because the moon is rising at the sea. So I have to consider all these factors and put it in the calculation that I'm doing to see where exactly do I want to have the moon. So I like doing math, so that works out for me. But these apps do help a lot. It can tell you what is the moon height. Black pin is my object, and what is the size of the moon, what is the diameter. It can also tell you how much of the moon size is going to cover the building or the object that you're going to take the photos of. So all these things do help in planning these photos. And recently I have started to take not just one photo, but I have started to take like the videos of the moonrise. So basically time lapse. So I'm taking multiple photos of the moon rising, and I cannot move my camera during that time. So if my calculation is wrong, I might not get the image, I might not get the time lapse itself. Because if I move my image, my time lapse is anyways gone. So move my camera, my time lapse is anyways gone. So that is the reason I really like to be very precise when it comes to calculation of how I have to shoot the moon, where I have to shoot the moon. In this case, as I mentioned, the moon rise position changes every month. So if you have seen someone standing at a place taking moon in Jan, it might be different in February. So you have to take care of that part and plan accordingly. I kind of prepared a moon rise calendar with 7-8 places where I had to take the pictures. And I put together for the whole year, last year, that which months are better for these situations. After you do everything, it's all luck, because there might be a cloud just behind the moon is rising, because moon is rising at the horizon. If you want to take a picture over there and you cannot see moon, there is atmosphere, there is haze, then all your planning is useless. So these events, these photos, in addition to the planning, you definitely need some luck and a good weather to capture these images. But I've seen more and more you try, you tend to get these images more and more. So how does it look like? In this case, if I have to use a telephoto lens. This is my setup. This is Sony A7R III with a 200 to 600 mm lens. With, I also add teleconverter to it, 2x teleconverter. So what I'm doing here is I am capturing only this part of the image. So what is happening here? As I'm going closer to the building, the building size is increasing. Moon size doesn't change. Moon is the same size wherever you see. You go 50 miles away, you'll see the moon the same size as well. But if you go more and more away from the object that you want to shoot, that object becomes smaller and smaller. So the moon actually appears bigger in comparison with the object. And that is nothing but the lens compression as well. So lens compression is the technology, is the technique that people use to capture these super moons, giant moons. They create a lot of drama seeing such big, unbelievable, larger than life moon beyond an object rising. What lens compression is essentially the phenomena in which the background appears to be closer to a subject and larger in comparison than it actually is. This compressed effect is achieved with the telephoto lens. So two factors. One of them is the distance. More away you go, the building, the object will become smaller and the moon will appear bigger. But actually the moon is the same size from anywhere you're shooting. So this I took in November, and the final image, one of the images, I kind of took the time lapse, and one of the images is this, which is showing you the moon rising at the top of the tower, just above the light. So I took a time lapse, so I had to do more calculations in this way. But if I had a place where I could go even 2 miles further back, then the moon would have covered the whole island in that case, and it would have looked even more bigger. But moon is the same size. All I'm doing is adding distance to the object and using a telephoto lens to capture that particular part. Any questions on this?
No, I think we're good.
All right. So what kind of gear I use for my moon images? First of all, I'm going to show you a lot of Nubble Lighthouse images because that's my favorite place to shoot moonrise, and it's just an hour away from my place, so I can drive down there anytime. I prefer a very steady tripod because if it is not windy, it is okay. But if it is windy, with such focal length that you're using, 1200 mm, then you get a lot of shake in your photos. So it is important that you have a steady tripod and a steady ball head, which can actually carry the weight of the lens and your camera. I use a telephoto lens, which is Sony 200-600 and f5.6 to 6.3. I use a 2x teleconverter in most of the cases. Some cases I don't. Sony a7R3, which also has a crop mode in it. So sometimes I use that to add more focal length to what I want in the picture. Important part is that I use a remote shutter release or intervalometer to capture the images. So it's not necessary that you capture the moon images only on the full moon night. Sometimes the full moon night might not give you good weather. And on the full moon night, it's so crowded these days to take the moon photos. There are hundreds and hundreds of photographers just standing there trying to take the same photo that you're taking. What separates you from them or others is how precise your calculation is. If you have to move around or you're planning to take a time lapse or what settings, what kind of picture from which location you have in mind. This image was taken a day after full moon. And luckily for me, there was a thin layer of clouds behind. So it kind of created the glow that you usually see with the sunrise in case of the moon. And as compared to the previous picture that I was sharing, this image is pretty dark because the previous image was taken at the moonrise. And in that case, the moonrise was about 15-20 minutes before sunset. So that is also an important factor I consider. I prefer to take images if the moonrise is about till 20 minutes after the sunset in the blue hour. So I get a lot of details from the moon. If it is 1 hour, 1.5 hours later, like in this case, then it gets a little tricky And if you have a camera whose low light performance is not that great, then you will not be able to fetch the details out of it. If I look closely, there is a lot of noise in the foreground in this image because this was taken in the night. It was pretty dark when I took this photo. But luckily, with the new cameras and technology, you can definitely get the details, necessary details from the image. Again, it's not only full moon, you can plan the moon. In this case, I planned the crescent moon behind the Nubble Lighthouse. I went out there around 1 a.m., I guess. It was pretty dark. They have put the halogen light. So luckily the lighthouse was lit for me. That kind of helped me. And there is always some distortion when the moon is rising due to the atmosphere. So you see some distortion there that kind of adds to the overall feel of the moonrise. In this case, it was crescent moon. And I haven't seen any crescent moon images here at Nubble Lighthouse. So I was really excited to go out and shoot it. So again, this is another image from the Nubble Lighthouse, but taken in December with the Christmas lights. And there were clouds. There were thin layer of cloud behind and a thick layer in front. So the thick layer kind of comes in front of the moon, but adds to drama on the layer that is behind. So again, I wanted this moon to be rising just above the light. So I planned it accordingly, and I use this to capture this image. So this one I took in October 2020. It's at Situate Lighthouse. Again, in that case, a lot of photographers, but I basically had planned to take, in this case, a time lapse. So for me, it was important that how I want to shoot the moon and where I have to stand. Because if I have to shoot the moon, it goes like this in the sky, then I have to know the height of the tower and exactly where I want the moon to be. The moonrise part that you see in the apps, it tells you where the center of the moon is going to be. And how much distance away you are, the bigger the moon looks like. So I had to basically plan the whole thing because I cannot move. And a lot of photographers were standing at one place, the others at others, because they had the flexibility. Not all of them were trying to take a time-lapse photos, but I had that limitation. So I had to be very, very accurate in that. And luckily it worked out for me. Sometimes your math can go wrong and you have to move around. So in that case, if you're not planning to take a time lapse, you can move around and be flexible how you want to take the image. Once I show you later the time lapse I've taken here, and then you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about here. This one was taken from a distance of about 6.5 miles. So it's such a big moon behind Graves Lighthouse. But again, as I said, the moon size is the same. It's just the distance that I'm adding and the telephoto lens on top of it. So if you take the moonrise image and you're taking it in the blue hour, you can get details in the foreground. But in this case, I planned this image at Mount Washington Observatory. I was a few miles away from it, standing just outside a motel, because during that day, my app showed me that this is the spot where I have to be to see the moon rising above the lighthouse, the Mount Washington Observatory. And it was not a full moon. It was again kind of a half moon that was rising, but I wanted to create that picture and I converted into black and white because I didn't have any details, any light in the foreground in that case. And it looked like the moon is overtaking the whole observatory, or some other planet that you can basically see the moon from, a big moon from. So that was my idea behind it. In this case, I didn't take a time lapse because my calculations were not right. I had to move, and but I still was able to capture certain pictures here. This is one of the shots that I took of the full moon at Boston Lighthouse. This one was shot from a distance of 4 miles, I think somewhere in Winthrop, that I was standing and planning for this to happen. Luckily, the weather was good. I could see the details. And as I said, if the moon rises just after, like in this case, it was 30 minutes after the sunset, there was still some light that I could capture the foreground, and also great details in the moon as well. So you might have seen a lot of moon photos, but as I'm taking a time lapse, I thought of why not putting it as a moon trail, like a star trail. So I captured all those photos. This is nothing but a 10-minute time lapse that I put into a moon trail. So you can see the different colors of the moon when it is closer to the horizon, and it goes up, it becomes yellow and more towards going towards the whiter side of it and becoming more and more bright. So I used the app called Stacks and put these images together to create the moon trail like you see the star trail. As I'm shooting a big moon, it kind of looks like a paintbrush. Someone has used a paintbrush in it. It doesn't look like a moon at all, but that's what I wanted to achieve with this image. So I try to do something new, try to be creative in my work, what I'm trying to do, and put in some effort, planning, and some thinking to create these images.
Manish, I have a question on how you meter the scene to set up your proper exposure on these moonshots.
So when I'm basically at the spot, just a few minutes before the moon rise, I try to meter my exposure for the moon. Basically, the moon is coming up. It's not that dark. So whatever details I'm getting at that point for the lighthouse, I keep it a little darker so that my moon is not blown out. And I see with the first shot if I've got the correct exposure in that case, just when the image is being taken. And if I have to adjust, I would adjust in the first shots itself very quickly. I don't adjust in the middle of the shots because if I am taking a time lapse, that doesn't work. If I'm not taking a time lapse, I have all the time where I can shoot, I can expose for the moon and basically see if I'm getting details in the foreground or not, if my moon is blown out or not, all those details you can see. But for me, if I'm taking a big moon, I do not keep the exposure of the moon more than 2 seconds. I prefer it 1 second, but I keep it between 1 and 2 seconds, depending on how bright or how dark it is. My preferred setting is f6.3, but if I'm using a teleconverter, it automatically becomes f13 in that case, 1 to 2 seconds. And then I play around with ISO to get the details, because for me, it's just not the moon. I want some details in the foreground as well if it is a moonrise. However, it's a shot, sorry.
Yeah, just a question. So conventional back in the old days, it used to be the moon, especially a full moon, I guess up in the sky is daylight exposure, F16 rule. So at moon rise or moon set, that must be different. That's number one. Number two is the moon is moving pretty quickly. You're saying 2 seconds, you don't get any distortion?
So if I am basically capturing the moon, I prefer 1 second, but sometimes I go to 2 seconds as well. And I don't see a lot of trail in that case with my personal experience. I can live up to 2 seconds. But if I'm going more than that, then my image is not sharp enough. My first preference is always 1 second in that case, because I'm shooting in the twilight zone. So when you see the moon above in the night, it's already pretty bright. And you're trying to shoot the moon to get the details, you get everything dark, completely black. But when the moon is rising, it's not that bright. It's basically colorful object like light that you see, and you can still get the details out of it depending on the exposure that I told you that I shoot with. And based on my experience as well, I keep that as a starting point for me. I know that if it is 20 minutes after the sunset, or if I'm shooting 1 hour after the sunset or 2 hours after the sunset, then I try to expose only for the moon. And in that particular case, I don't worry about the foreground objects. If the foreground object doesn't have any light, it will be dark. It will be like a silhouette. But if you are shooting with buildings, they have certain lights in them. If you're going to New York City is already always lit up. So if you're shooting a big moon there, then you don't have to worry about the foreground, because you shoot for moon, you get always the details in the buildings as well. But these lighthouses, they don't have a lot of light except for the light on the tower. So I try to capture the moon above the whole building, so I get the details in that case.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. So this is one of the images. I couldn't get the moon above the lighthouse. This is also Boston light from a different angle because there was atmosphere. And that is why you see it's a little foggy when the light, I have captured this at 2 seconds, I believe, 2.5 seconds, I guess. And because of that, I could capture the little motion in the light along with the fog. And it feels like there is a spotlight from Boston light to the moon. So as I was not able to capture the moon above the lighthouse because there was atmosphere, I couldn't even see the moon when it was rising. I didn't lose hope, and I still captured the moon with kind of an effect that there's a spotlight coming in from Boston light trying to light up the moon. So if you don't have a bigger lens, you can still capture the drama in the moonrise with your wide angle lens. So this is one of my favorite images from Yosemite National Park, where I have captured the moonrise and the atmosphere after a snowstorm. So clearing storm, a lot of snow, fresh snow, and fog. And with the moon rising, it was a surreal landscape that I have never seen before. I just didn't want to even take the picture and just enjoy the whole scene and just be a part of it. That's how much beautiful it was when I saw it. I kind of prepared my setup quickly and took this image. Luckily for me, this has been published in a couple of National Geographic books as well, this particular image. And it's one of my favorite images till date. So you definitely don't need a big lens to create some dramatic moonrise images. But it really depends on what you're planning to shoot and what the purpose is. So this is the last image that I want to show today. Is after I took the Nubble image in the previous one that I showed, this one, after I took this image, the moonrise was 20 minutes before sunset. So I still had time, but the moon was above. So I decided to drive down to the Nubble light, in this case, and capture a wide angle. So it's important that how you compose your images. I got down and I found this heart-shaped puddle in the foreground. And I decided to include that in the vertical image that I wanted to shoot with the festive lights and the moon rising. I actually took 3 photos. In one of the images, I was focusing in the foreground and then middle ground and then on the lighthouse, because I was very close to this puddle. I wanted to display the light from the Nubble Lighthouse reflecting on the corners of this puddle and giving it a shape of a heart. So that was my purpose, and that's how I composed this image, and I shot it with the 14 mm lens. So this was my presentation for today. Thank you so much for your time. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook as well, and I'm open to any questions you have. If not, then I'll go and show you the time lapse that I was talking about.
Okay, thank you, Manish. This has been excellent. Yeah, if you could show us some of the time lapse, and then we'll open it up for a few questions after that. How's that?
Perfect. Let me see if you can you see my desktop right now?
Yes.
We don't see the desktop. We see, well, now we do. We saw the image at Yosemite.
Yeah, we're seeing your full desktop.
So I'm gonna play this. And hopefully you hear the sound as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
On your time lapse, Manish, how often, what's the interval between the individual images that you take?
So you can keep it for 1 second. That's what I do most of the times. I'm taking 1 second image and keeping it 1 second. But some of these images I have actually manually taken the pictures because it was bright enough for me. So I was doing it, I was keeping the remote in my hand. I was just pressing it as I was looking at it and enjoying it. So if what that causes you, not the very free movement of the moon that can cause you that way, but in my case, luckily I got the details even with that as well, and it looked okay for me. But I usually keep it not more than 1 second.
Okay, thank you. Just looking at the chat room here, we have a tremendous number of comments that say, fantastic show, great job, let's do a field trip, really amazing work, spectacular work, and so on. So I gather from that the club has really enjoyed your presentation tonight tremendously, Manish. I really want to thank you. I know I got an awful lot out of it. We'll open it up at this time for a few questions if any of the members have questions.
I just want to say that I really appreciated, I know that a long lens will compress the scene, but I never understood the optics until the way you explained it tonight, was that you're bringing the subject, let's say the lighthouse, is becoming bigger in the image, and that the moon is staying the same, but that's how you get the moon looking bigger in the image. So that was helpful to me.
Yeah. Now, I noticed there were a couple of comments when you were showing the Photopills where people were saying we really need a course in Photopills. I just want to mention, if you go onto the Photopills website, they have a tremendous number of YouTube videos where they take individual situations, and they'll have a half hour or an hour even sometimes session on exactly how to do this planning for a moonshot or for different plannings and so on. They've really got a great website for learning how to use Photopills in lots of different applications. So I encourage you to check that out on the Photopills website if you're a Photopill user. And if you're not, I encourage you to use Photopills. It's a great app.
Yes, it is. And they definitely have a lot of good material on their website. A lot of technical stuff, a lot of good material that you can go through and have a look.
Okay. Any other questions from the club members? Okay, it sounds
No.
like
Well,
we're,
your images are super, super, super images.
Thank you so
Every
much.
one of them consistently.
yeah,
Thank
yeah, this was amazing tonight. Thank you, Dan.
And I appreciate the time of going the middle of the night and all hours of the day and night for these images. That's quite impressive too.
Yeah. Yes, you have to stay up late, Joni.
I know. Well, I can get up early. I can get up at 3 or 4 in the morning.
Yeah,
It's
Earlier this is
dedication.
better for you. You can plan it in March, April, that you can see in the earlier time the Milky Way.
mhm,
That's dedication to your art and making photographs the way you do.
It's true.
It's awe-inspiring. It's sort of like, how did he even think of that? So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Our
All right, so
pleasure.
I will send you the link tomorrow, Manish, to the recording tonight, and then we'll wait to get the YouTube link from you.
Perfect. Sounds good to me.
All right,
okay, great.
very
Thank
good. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much,
Appreciate
Manish.
your time.
You
Good
hit
to
all the
see
ballpark.
everybody.
Appreciate
Yeah, it's true.
it. Bye.
All right, be safe, be well, everyone. Good night.
Good night, all. See you next week.
Night.
Good night. Take care, everybody.